Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Mindspace Community Podcast hosted by mytherapist.ng. It's me, Fauzia Zakaria, and we have a wonderful guest with us today. But before we get into it, I have to remind you to subscribe, like, share, and comment now to our wonderful guest. Hello, hi, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Please, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Grace. I am a psychotherapist. I've been a psychotherapist for almost 7 years.
Wow.
My work is trauma informed. I work with a lot of self-actualization, and my work is also underpinned by existentialism as well as other interventions.
Okay, so that sounds like a lot of things that we should learn about. And our topic, our episode for today is how to navigate grief and loss. Grace here will walk us through a compassionate conversation about understanding grief, understanding loss, and the practical ways that we as human beings, after such a loss or after feeling like a part of ourselves is missing, how we can move forward. So, thank you, Grace, for honoring us with this invitation and coming here. And I guess the first question to ask is, what exactly is grief?
Great question. Grief is a byproduct or a result of remarkable or significant loss. And this could be loss of a loved one, loss of an opportunity, loss of our identity, our sense of self, or maybe someone that we had a complicated relationship with.
What are the different ways that grief manifests in? As Nigerians, I think after watching Nollywood, I'm expecting to see the woman rolling on the floor, screaming,
Very on
other
brand.
people crying. You go while they're eating jollof rice.
Mhm.
You get, but I know grief manifests in many other ways. So, what are the different ways that grief manifests in?
Okay. Grief's impact is multidimensional. It can take a toll on our physical health, our emotional well-being, our existing relationships, and even in our professional lives.
Okay. This one I learned from film too. I don't know. And it is the stages of grief. So is this something that's actually true? And can you highlight and explain the stages for us?
That is an interesting question because I don't put too much stock into the stages of grief in my work.
Okay.
Because interestingly enough, the creator of the stages of grief, Kubler-Ross, didn't intend for the stages of grief to be used in such a formulaic manner. And people took it a little too literally, where it's like, number 1, denial, number 2 is this, number 3 is that. And I'm not saying that the stages of grief do not manifest. I'm saying that they are cyclical. And that's why I don't use them as a guide for my work. I just let the grief happen. I let it unfold the way it wants to unfold, and I hold space for whoever is grieving. I bear witness, basically.
Wow. Okay, so I love how you say it is cyclical. But when you say cyclical, and then I think, is it that you're saying denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, denial? Is it going in that, clockwise or whatever motion? Or are you saying it's cyclical in that you could feel denial now, and then you feel depression later, and then acceptance later before you come back to anger?
Yeah, that last one is more like it. Actually, it's more of a zigzag. If we're talking about what kind of motion it is, it's more of a zigzag. There isn't much order. There is more chaos than order when it comes to grief. And so it's like you said, today it could be acceptance. Tomorrow it could be the last one on the list. The next day it could be the third one on the list. So the list is not necessarily a chronological guide so much as it is I wouldn't even really call it a roadmap. It's like a loose guide, a loose interpretation of something that cannot be quantified.
Okay. So how would you say grief affects someone mentally, emotionally, and even physically?
Okay, so as with so many other emotions, grief can manifest in physical symptoms. So it could be waking up with headaches, it could be stomach pains, it could be tension in your body, it could be any number of things. It could even be high blood pressure, low blood pressure, all sorts of things. So that is in the physical realm. In the emotional realm, there are all sorts of things going on too. It's this mixed bag of anger, even guilt Because sometimes I've heard people say, oh, I feel guilty that I'm happy because I lost this person. And it feels like being happy means that I don't remember this person. So there are elements of guilt there. And maybe even, oh, maybe I wasn't good enough to this person. Maybe I didn't spend enough time with this person while they were alive. Or if it were an opportunity, for example, all sorts of emotions. Depending on what was lost, the sense of self too, there is the warping of your self-concept. It's like, well, if this isn't who I am anymore, if this is no longer part of my identity, then who am I? What does that mean about how I move out or move around in the world, how I navigate my relationships and my interactions with other people? And so it's all sorts of things. And then with the mental, there are things like brain fog, difficulty functioning, just executive dysfunction, difficulty making decisions, and all kinds of things.
So would you say that all of this is a natural byproduct? Are this the ways grief manifests, is it a natural response to loss?
Yes. Grief is a natural response to loss, and you cannot use someone else's grief to determine how another person's grief is going to look. And so while it may be natural, some people, I've heard people who say they had relatives get upset with them because they weren't a wreck, they weren't crying, and they were not upset and visibly dysregulated. But they were also going through it. And ironically, down the road, that has now impacted that person's relationship with grief because they're trying to figure out what it means to grieve and thinking about how it looks to other people. And I think that's something that we could stand to do a little less of when it comes to grieving. Worry less and wonder less about how it looks to other people and think more about how it feels to us who are actually in it. And so, yes, very natural responses. There are people who respond with numbness. They don't feel anything. They're experiencing anhedonia, loss of pleasure. They are not present in their own lives. And it looks different from person to person. There are a lot of similarities, but the experience of grief is as unique as the person experiencing it.
The experience of grief is as unique as the person experiencing it. I think that's a great line that I am going to learn out of this. But now we've established what grief is. How do we move forward? Because we are still living, right? So what are the practical strategies for moving forward from grief and loss?
Okay. Great question. Let me give a little preface or disclaimer by saying this advice should take the shape of the person who is experiencing the grief. And so, yeah, it's not a hard and fast rule in terms of this is how you should process your grief exactly. It's like, what does that look like for you? So the first one would be feel your feelings. They are uncomfortable. Grief is one of the most uncomfortable emotions and experiences out there, but we make ourselves more miserable when we react to our grief with resistance rather than with acceptance and with being with it and with sitting with it. So that would be the first one. The second would be to lean on your support system. Whether that means an already established support system of people you surround yourself with, or whether it's like establishing a support system right then and there with maybe grief support groups, or maybe talking to other people who have lost something or someone and figuring out how to get support there. I will also add to beware of anyone who is trying to police your grief. Oh, you should be over that by now. People who refuse to talk about your loved one or refuse to let you talk about your loved one. Oh, that'll just make you too sad. And it almost seems like the person never existed, or that version of you never existed, or the thing you lost, the opportunity, or whatever it is. So make space for people who make space for your grief, people who are willing to bear witness with you and hold you up, rather than the ones that are wagging their fingers at you in such a life-altering moment of vulnerability. And the fourth would be, or the third would be self-care practices. So this would mean listening to your body's wisdom. This would mean resting up when you're tired, resting up when you can, because grief takes so much out of you. It really does. It's physically and emotionally and mentally exhausting. So getting rest in whatever shape or form that looks like, active rest by sleeping, or more passive rest where you are trying to declutter your mind and you're not doing too much at once, or juggling a full plate or having your hand in too many pies. And nourishing your body too is another act of self-care, another self-care practice, making sure that you are trying to eat when you feel hungry. And probably you're going to struggle with appetite when you're grieving. So it's even, how can I add nourishment to my day? In whatever shape or form that looks like. Maybe some fruits during the day, maybe having one meal if you can manage that, something that is maybe nutrient dense. And number 4 would be cultivating a sense of meaning. And it's important to state that this isn't about understanding why you lost what or who you lost. It's about understanding who you are in the aftermath. What does this look like for you? This meaning can be reflected in how do you value the people, the things, the opportunities that are still present in your life? How do you choose to honor the loss of who or what you loved and lost? How do you recognize the ways in which this loss has changed you? And it's also considering, how can I bring joy into my life and into the life of others? And I think writing, journaling, other creative outlets can facilitate this meaning making. So that's that. The last thing I would say is getting help from a mental health professional. So this is recognizing when you have maxed out in navigating your grief yourself, and it feels like this flood that you don't have any sense of control over, and you don't have your bearings, and recognizing when you need to talk to someone about that.
And I think you've mentioned this when you spoke before, but some people have some common myth and misconception of what grief is, and when it comes to grieving, you should be over it by now. It's been a few months now, like it's not that bad, like you should be leaving, or you have to grieve a certain way. I haven't seen you cry since then, or I haven't seen you spiral since then. You were not, like, you didn't break down and fall down on the road or something. So like, can we correct this misconception and this myth? So how would you correct them? What do you want people to know so they stop repeating these things?
Actually, a universal way to correct this is by being curious. Right? Because a lot of what you're saying demonstrates people's own assumptions and misconceptions, and them superimposing them on other people. And it's like, instead of you should be over it by now, it's, hey, how are you doing? Have you eaten? Can I buy you lunch? Can I buy you dinner? Can I make you lunch? Can I bring you dinner? Can I sit with you? Can we watch a movie together? Can we talk? Can we listen to music? Stuff like that, because it's an open door versus you should versus why aren't you. And it's like, imagine someone is grieving something and you are over there pointing your finger at them and saying, oh, I noticed you're not doing da 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 da. I noticed that you are falling short of my expectations of grief. By asking what they need. And sometimes it can be difficult for them to articulate what they need truthfully, but it's like, read the room. What do you think you would need or might need? Other than people giving you unsolicited advice and, unsolicited commentary about how you're doing grief wrong. How can you be supportive? How can you be present? And so that is the food for thought.
Okay. So we have a few questions from our audience. And I think you've also touched a bit on this with your very expansive answer. And I love the fact that you say be curious, because I think there's a lot of things that some people miss when they don't really understand what's going on. Because this comes from the fact that you don't understand what's going on, right? People are asking, or someone is asking, how do I, and this is something that I also struggle with, you're going for a condolence visit or something, how do I support a loved one who is grieving without saying the wrong thing? Because we're always scared that I'll say something that will tip him off, or then the person will remember this for years after as that one thing that I said during a very important time in their life. So how do I support a loved one who is grieving without saying the wrong thing?
That's a great question, because that is such a delicate time. And that can actually make or break a relationship, saying something wrong in the moment. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier about curiosity. Do less talking and more observing. Do less talking and more presence. Let your presence be visibly and viscerally known. Let this person know that you are in their corner, no matter what their grief looks like. And so there's that. And there's something I learned from a grief expert, my favorite grief expert, David Kessler. And he talks about how the most important thing to do for someone grieving and the most important thing that people grieving want is bearing witness of their grief, not telling them how to feel or anything like that. Grief is not supposed to be, it's not meant to be sanitized. It's meant to be validated. It's meant to be experienced. And so, yeah, less talking, more learning, more listening, and even down the road, because usually when it's fresh, it's difficult for them to talk about the person. But let it not be that the person never existed. Talk about them. Let them talk about their favorite memories of the person with you, what they loved about the person, what they loved about the person's companionship. And I do think I need to add this as well, that grief isn't always about love. Sometimes we lose people who mistreated us while they were alive, and that is a whole ball of complicated feelings.
Wow.
And so to be able to hold space for that is to, again, sit with them. You can be willing to sit in silence with them. Be willing to deal with the discomfort of sitting in silence with them. Be willing to deal with the discomfort of sitting with someone's pain, because that is some visceral pain. That is just, words cannot describe it. So being able to sit with that.
Sometimes you can feel it in the room.
Yes. Be willing to cry with them.
And I also, thank God you touched on this, because I was going to say, what if you didn't really like the person? And I think we don't talk about this a lot, but in Nigeria, we have a lot of dysfunctional families.
Oh, yes.
You had a dysfunctional relationship with your father, per se, and then he dies. I'm sure that's very complicated. So how can someone deal with those sorts of feelings? Some people, do I feel bad? Do I not feel bad? Do I grieve this person? Do I know? Because even if you have dysfunctional relationship with family, you still love them to an extent because they're family. So how do you deal with that type of grief?
The answer, because you were saying, do I do this? Do I do that? Do I do that? The answer is yes. The answer is you are allowed to feel angry. You are allowed to feel rage. You are allowed to feel disappointment. You are allowed to feel relief. You are allowed
relief.
Yes.
That does not make you a bad person.
Yes. It makes you human. I think, honestly, accepting your humanity is such a huge piece of this, because we are humans. We have the full spectrum of human emotions, whatever that looks like. And that means, I didn't like this person when they were alive. This person treated me horribly. This person left me with trauma on trauma on trauma. And you are also allowed to grieve who they weren't. You are allowed to grieve how they didn't show up for you. You are allowed to grieve how they disappointed you, how they didn't step up, how you never had the closeness you would have liked. You never had the relationship you would have liked. You are allowed to grieve all of that, because when you're human, there's room for the both, and there's room for the joy, the elation, and the despair. There's room for the relief and just the burdensomeness, the weightiness of it. So there's room for all of it. So make sure you are making room for all of it, and that you are being compassionate towards yourself as you are experiencing every single one of these emotions.
Are there any specific signs that suggest that someone should seek for professional help when they're grieving?
This is a tricky one for grief, because typically one of the primary criteria primary criterion for seeking mental health services is it affecting your level of functioning? And it's like a loss of self, of other, of a thing is going to affect your level of functioning. So if you feel overwhelmed, recognize that your threshold is different from other people's threshold, and seek the help that you need. Don't think, XYZ person didn't need to seek help, so why should I? That makes me weak. No, think about the sheer power that can be found in having someone hold space for you, and having someone recognize how important this thing or this opportunity or this person was to you, and trying to facilitate you moving through the stages at your own pace. That is invaluable. So if it feels overwhelming at any point, even if it just happened, it's just fresh, and you're like, I can't handle this, I don't know if I can go on, seek some professional help. See a mental health therapist, talk to them about what's going on.
Okay. I get that. And I think this question, correct me if I'm wrong, always applies in situations like this. When you're beginning to ask yourself, should I see someone? Then that's a sign that you probably should see someone. This discussion has been very helpful. Thank you, Grace. We've talked about, and I think one big thing that I have felt, or one big thing that I have learned, is you should feel everything. You're allowed to feel everything, and you're allowed to process grief the way you're processing grief, right? And like when other people in the sort of community we have, when other people are like, you're not crying enough, or you should be over it, you should not listen to them, and you should listen to your body. Now, Grace, I would come back to you to ask if you have any last words, any words of encouragement for listeners navigating grief and loss, or any last word you have about this topic.
Okay. I feel like I need to reiterate that grief cannot be sanitized. It cannot be curated. It cannot be policed. It must be experienced. It must be felt. And we are to bear witness of our own grief and of other people's grief. And I think this is how we move through it. And I also need to highlight the importance of meaning, because some say that's the final stage. And again, since I don't do the chronological order, I wouldn't call it the final stage, but it's very, very, very important to figure out what your life looks like in the aftermath. How can you live in honor of this person or this opportunity or this thing? How can you pick up the pieces and keep moving without toxic positivity and pretending it never happened, or pretending that it doesn't hurt as much as it does. And so those are my final words for it. Make room for your grief. Make room for it.
Thank you, Grace, for your wonderful insights and your participation in this. Thank you for telling us that we have to experience grief. We should not police grief. We have to express grief and things like that. So thank you very much. If you're experiencing grief or navigating grief and the things that come with it, you can always access mental health help at mytherapist.ng. You can download the app and have access to different mental health therapists and psychologists that have various range of specializations that will be able to help you. This is a reminder for you to subscribe, rate, review the podcast, and share with your family and friends, especially anyone who's going through grief right now. Thank you so much for listening. And remember that you have to experience and express grief and feel everything. Do not allow other people to police your grief. Thank you, everyone. Bye.